Good evening, everyone. My name is Denise Lucy, and I am the Institute for Leadership Studies Executive Director and the Professor of Business and Leadership at Dominican University of California in Marin County. And it is my great pleasure for many, many, many years to be in partnership on a program called the Leadership Lecture Series with Book Passage. Elaine and Bill Petricelli have had in our community for over 45 years. And for many, many of those, many years, we've had great authors to come to talk about great ideas, about change leading issues. And tonight we have two terrific folks that are going to be our featured guests. I'd like to introduce to you Elaine Petricelli, CEO of Book Passage, and she is going to introduce our guests and welcome some other partners to our program. So good to see you tonight, Elaine.
Thank you, Denise, and I'm so excited about tonight. These are two people who I admire so much. Before I get started, I'd like to again thank Dominican for the tremendous support that we get as we partner together, and thank our sister stores who are with us tonight and their customers, Books Incorporated and Rakestraw Books. And as you probably know, independent bookstores help each other. And these are two of my siblings in the book world. So I'm really happy to have all of you here tonight. I am a longtime fan of Frank Bruni. He's been to Book Passage several times, but I was not ready for The Beauty of Dusk. This book is so profound, funny at times, loving, and I can't say enough about it. The Beauty of Dusk on vision lost and found. And I think about what happens to someone who has, wakes up one morning and everything has changed. And a lot of things have changed for Frank Bruni. As you know, he's been with the New York Times for 25 years. He's been the food critic. He's been the theater critic, I think. He's written the op-eds about the world. You name it, this guy's done it. And now he has moved to being a full professor at Duke University, where he's teaching journalism. But he hasn't left us in a lurch because he does a weekly newsletter. Don't miss it. You're going to love it. And occasionally pops up in the New York Times on the op-ed page. And if I could start again, I think I'd be applying to Duke to get to be a journalism student under Frank. And I'm so excited that Heather Havrilesk is with us tonight. Heather is one of the funniest and profound people I know. Anyone who's ever been married or had a relationship with somebody knows that it's absolutely wonderful, except when it isn't. And this book, Foreverland, is just fabulous on the divine tedium of marriage. You may have seen her piece in the New York Times about that hysterical trip where she was trying to scuba dive in the Great Barrier Reef with her kids and her husband. Don't miss it. It's in the book. And I just love handing this book to people because they come back and they say, oh my God, what an experience. So Heather and Frank, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I think we're going to have some questions in the chat room if you have questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can, but we have a lot to talk about. So thank you. Let's get started.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was great. Okay, hopefully people can hear me. Frank, you can hear me?
I can hear you well.
Okay, great. So thank you so much to Book Passages for having us and having Frank Bruni here. A sort of interesting story. Frank moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, about a month before I did. And I was thrilled to find out that he had moved here. I had no idea. We have a friend in common. I've always read Frank's work and admired it. And so we've recently become friends. But we live about, I don't know, how close do we live? Maybe 2 miles away from each other.
3 to 5 miles. Yeah.
So very lucky for me that when I moved here, I found Frank, and we've just had a really good time in North Carolina together. So I'm thrilled to be here to ask Frank some questions about The Beauty of Dusk. I loved this book also. I'm going to hold it up too. Everyone's going to hold it up. It was just, I was so surprised by this book. I didn't know that. I mean, I write an advice column, and I like to think of myself as a sort of someone who can tackle these heavy kinds of existential questions. And I found myself discovering and navigating whole new stretches of road with this book, that things that I just hadn't contemplated at all. And the way that you poetically and sort of gracefully and sweetly explore these very heavy questions, and really just the darkness, facing the darkness in your hands has become this truly beautiful thing, just true to the title. And so I have way too many questions for you, Frank. But I guess my first question is just, how did you decide that you could write about this? Did you have misgivings when you set out to write about this stroke? And how long ago was the stroke now? I have lost track of that. And when did you decide that it was going to be worthwhile, or that you could understand why you should write a whole book about this experience that seems so difficult?
So the stroke that you're referring to, so for those who aren't familiar with the kind of background here, in October of 2017, I woke up one morning and there was something wrong with my vision. And to kind of cut to the chase, within a matter of days, I had been told that I had suffered a kind of stroke of the optic nerve, that the optic nerve behind my right eye was ravaged beyond repair, that I would never see normally or functionally out of my right eye again. And then the real capper or clincher, whatever the right word is there, was I was initially told there was a 40% chance that the same thing would happen to my left eye. I've since learned that the conventional wisdom on that is more like 20%, but to this day I live with the worry that I will wake up some morning and the same thing will have happened to my left eye that happened to my right eye. I initially didn't think, okay, I'm going to write about this, but as I went through the first stages of a medical odyssey, as I went through a rather scary clinical NIH trial of an experimental treatment for this, I realized I had something rather dramatic and relatable to write about in terms of, how terrifying the prospect of losing your vision is, in terms of just dealing with a medical emergency and a medical travail and trying to figure out how to find emotional and psychological peace in all of that. And so in February of 2018, I wrote an extra long column for the Times about what I was going through. And it wasn't until then that I thought it might be a book. And I thought it might be a book because people in publishing who read that 2,800 word, 3,000 word upsized column said, this feels to us like the abstract of a book. This feels to us like the germ of a book. And that's how the book came to be.
Did you find it, did you ever say, no, it's not a book, I can't write this? I mean, did you find it harrowing to think about, to sort of dive into such a difficult time in your life at all?
I thought it might not be a book for some of the normal reasons of kind of self-doubt and insecurity and self-consciousness that I always have. I thought, I don't know that my thinking is going to be deep enough, or my gaze, my field of vision, pardon all the vision metaphors and puns and such that will come, but I just wasn't sure that I had enough to say and that I was a deep enough thinker or a nimble enough writer to make this last and matter for the length of a book. I didn't worry about going into it in terms of sharing stuff. I mean, I've always been an open book of a person, whether it's columns I write, whether it's an earlier memoir I wrote called Born Round. I mean, I've always felt comfortable, or at least at peace, sharing very intimate stuff with the world. I just didn't know if I was going to ultimately have enough to say, and I hope I found enough to say. As I went through the paces of writing it, it did feel to me like, no, this is a natural book, because the book is not about the prospect of blindness at the end of the day. It's not about vision loss or vision impairment or my particular peculiar malady. It is about the fact that as we age, we are all going to face threats to our potency. We're going to face parameters we never faced before. And we're going to have to figure out psychologically and emotionally how to confront those new limits, those new parameters, and still find peace and contentment and joy. And that's really what the book is about. And in that sense, I don't think it's about eyesight at all.
Yeah, no, I was surprised in reading your book that it kind of branched out into these bigger questions so quickly. I sort of expected to stay in a state of misery for longer, and that you would be, that we'd have at least one kind of, I expected that we'd have like a chapter where you were just self-pitying and all we heard was self-pity, but it makes sense that that's not exactly your style in a way, and that's not really where you stayed. But I loved the range of people you found who had faced similar to sort of, or more difficult. I mean, I don't want to say, how can you rate a challenge in anyone's life against another, but you found people who had a lot of people who had vision challenges. You found people with other kinds of challenges. And one of the people early on who you talk about is your friend Dory from college. And I love the stories about Dory. She had a great sense of humor, and you remembered her from college as being someone who was extremely upbeat and extremely funny. And then you found out later that she had Parkinson's, and that she was diagnosed with Parkinson's at a young age. And then one of the things that you say about Dory, if you don't mind me reading this part of your book that I really loved, you wrote, Dory rattled off punchlines and quips. That was crucial, but not as crucial as something else she did, or rather didn't do. She forbid any excessive or extravagant contemplation about what had happened, was happening, and might happen to her. She thought about it only so much. Sure, she appraised it to the extent that it demanded appraisal. She adjusted to it as necessary, and she attended to it fully, seeking out the right doctors and carefully and often skeptically evaluating what they had to say. But she didn't stare at it, didn't focus on it. That was a choice, a discipline. I really love this concept that when people really face something difficult, you think about it as you have to move through it, you have to accept it. And I think one of the things that people don't realize is part of getting through something sometimes is actually deciding and resolving not to fixate on it, not to let your anxious side chew on it around the clock. And I really thought that, I guess what I wondered was how observing Dory affected your approach to your own challenge, and if you could relate to it, and if you kind of took a cue from her.
I took many cues from her, and she's an extraordinary person who, as you said, was diagnosed with Parkinson's quite early, like I think 35 was the exact age. And there are many different kinds of progression of Parkinson's, many different degrees of severity. Dory has a pretty severe experience with Parkinson's. But she just kind of intuitively knew, she's a very emotionally wise person. She intuitively knew that to become consumed by it, self-consumed by it, to let it define her and to be defined by it was going to really limit her life in a way that she didn't want her life to be limited. Dory would come to New York for a visit, and I would meet her, and we would go out to eat, and then we would walk somewhere else. And one of her feet would be dragging behind her, and she would have to navigate every intersection very carefully. But she had made the decision, and I think it was a wise and a happy making one, that better to be out there navigating that intersection than to be so frightened by it and so conscious of and self-conscious about your Parkinson's that you basically kind of stayed indoors. And you sort of let Parkinson's win twice, once by presenting you with these physical challenges, and then another time by actually taking whole chunks of your life away from you. She wasn't willing to do that. And she taught me a lot. And there are other people in the book. The book is, as you know, Heather, a sort of melange of the personal and the outward looking. I behaved when I was faced with this challenge, with this terror, with this notion that my life was going to be a little bit more difficult to navigate and that I might have more losses coming still. I approached that very journalistically. I thought, I'm going to interview people who have crossed through a juncture like this, whether it was about vision or Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or their various medical challenges in the book. And I'm going to listen to them and learn from them. And all of them, to a person, the people who made the most of their circumstances and were not undone by their circumstances, were people who decided not to be defined by those circumstances, to do as Dory did, to find the right medical treatment, to attend fully and responsibly to the problem at hand, but not to let it be the sole or the foremost thought in their minds at all time. It was such an important lesson. And I think it's an important lesson for all of us, because I think the book is ultimately, Heather, about aging. I think those of us who have, and I'd like to hear you say something about it, because you've had in recent years a very profound medical scare and medical challenge of your own. And I think people like you and me who've been through that have gotten a sort of crash accelerated course in aging, in the sort of thing that's going to happen to everybody as we get older. As we get older, we are going to face physical challenges we didn't face when we were younger, because, as I say in the book, all of our bodies are time bombs and they detonate in different ways. But when it happens to you early, despite the challenge and hardship of that, there's a grace in it as well, because you see how resilient you can be, how resilient all people can be. You see how nimble we are as a species, we human beings. And I think it takes some of the fear out of aging. But I'm curious if your experience with cancer made you feel that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I would say that the first wave of it for me was nothing but fear. And also, but the hardest part was not knowing, and I don't know if you could relate to this, the hardest part was not knowing what my diagnosis was. So that was actually the worst week of the whole thing. There's a way that once you have the challenge in front of you and you know what you're supposed to do, it's a little easier. The period of the unknown, it kind of plays on your neurotic mind, right? Where your storytelling mind can't do anything but tell new stories with the abyss. And I found that the hardest. I loved how, but I did have a similar thing where I felt like once I was faced with, and I was very lucky. I had a tiny bit of cancer and I just had surgeries ahead, but no chemo and no extended sort of, I think for me, it's sort of like physical pain is one thing and depression is sort of worse. And so anything that has mental and emotional direct consequences, that's extremely difficult. And that's what I fear the most. As far as the physical pain it was sort of, pain is interesting. I also think that what I related to in your book partially is that for a writer, if a challenge is interesting, it's almost like you get a little discount on the hardship of it, because you're so fascinated by the process and you're kind of naturally taking notes in your mind that you're just like, oh, I have to remember this. This is crazy. Like, what's happening? It's almost like you start to think, God, I've got to start reporting more, because you being thrown into a whole new environment with a new challenge in your hands, everything becomes surreal and it kind of exciting in a way. I feel like there was a spirit of that in your discovery phase with what was happening to your eyesight. Is that
Well,
somewhat true?
Oh, it's totally true. I mean, I'm glad I'm about to use a phrase I hate because it's so overused and cliche, but I mean, I think I realized there were benefits, for lack of a better word, to leaning into it, right? So I decided if my condition, NAION, those are the initials it goes by, is very rare. And I decided if I'm going to have a rare condition, I'm going to really sort of, I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to explore it. I'm going to turn it into an intellectual adventure, because that is one of the things available to me in terms of finding a silver lining or turning a sow's ear into a silk purse. And so, I mean, the perfect illustration of that is I literally got a free New York Times funded trip to Greece out of it, right? Because I was in 2 successive clinical trials that I qualified for. They were the only, to this moment, since this happened to me 4.5 years ago, they're the only 2 really legit, worthwhile clinical trials into treatments for the rare condition that I and some other people have. I happened to qualify for both of them. And the first one was 3 shots into the affected eye, which we were talking about pain a moment ago. I was terrified about those shots. Not a good thing, and yet a real lesson in the fact that you can get through anything. I mean, I was shocked at how well I handled that pain because I had to and I had no choice. And there's a lesson in that. The second clinical trial was 6 months worth of twice weekly injections that you learn to administer yourself into your thigh or your stomach, as if you were, trying to get pregnant and taking hormones. And that was also a revelation to me because I'm the least dexterous human being in the world. And I really mean that. Like, my shoelaces are always coming untied. It took my father and 2 of my uncles to teach me how to tie a tie because I was so bad at it. And so the notion that I was going to be sent home with a sharps container and all of these syringes and needles and vials, and I was going to actually learn without injuring myself excessively to constantly inject myself, that's laughable to people who know me. And yet I did it, which is, again, this human nimbleness is incredible. But I also decided, what is this thing I'm injecting? It turned out it was a compound made from the resin of the mastic tree, which is an evergreen shrub that grows in the Mediterranean, but especially in abundance at an especially high quality on the island of Chios in eastern Greece, like within sight of Turkey. And it turned out that all of the vials of serums that were in my fridge, those were made essentially from this product from Chios, Greece, and distinctly from Chios, Greece. So I said to my editor, don't you think I should write a column about man goes to meet his medicine? And she said, sure. And I think it was as much out of pity as anything else. Now, it was a legitimate story because there is I talk in that story about bioprospecting and the promise of medicines that come from the natural world and that come from dimensions of the natural world that we've never explored. And all of this is in the book. But the real point of that story is there is a human talent for turning hardship into something else. And that can be done, that alchemy can be done in so many different ways. And for me, it was turning the learning of my condition into an act of journalism and into an act of inquiry and into an adventure.
Yeah. So you're saying kind of partially that you used your curiosity to pull you through it. And then you also seemed like you were energized by that curiosity and sort of energized by the questions that arose along the way for you. I feel like the spirit of curiosity sort of drives the narrative of this book in so many ways, because you weave in so beautifully the stories of other people who had inspired you and I just want to mention a few of them because I loved so many of them so much. And, in the beginning, I thought, here comes another person with a problem. Who cares? And by the end of each person, I would say to myself, God, I want to know this person. I need to know who this is. I feel like I was envious of you sitting down with all of these amazing people. So one of the people I loved, Marion Shepard, who went blind but taught line dancing classes at age 73 at her local community center for blind people. And in the book, she says, we've got to keep moving. You know why? Because we're alive. And she's teaching a class full of blind people together are dancing. How was that? How did you find her? And how was it to witness that?
I found Marion because after this happened, I'm so lucky in so many ways. And one of the things that this whole experience has done for me is it has made me more aware and more grateful of all the ways in which I am lucky. And because I am a quasi-public figure, because I wrote about what was happening to me in the New York Times, various people reached out, and one was an extraordinary woman named Nancy Miller, who runs a social services agency in downtown Manhattan called Visions, and it's for visually impaired people, for the most part for low-income visually impaired people, and that's where the line dancing class was taking place. And Nancy said, if I can ever be a resource for you, or if you're ever interested in chatting, and I said, absolutely, let's meet. And we had breakfast, and I was asking Nancy all sorts of stuff about vision challenges, vision impairment, because I was educating myself in a very broad way about what being blind means, the various ways in which people are or go blind. And it is an enormous diversity of ways, and there are many gradations of blindness. And I said to Nancy, Nancy, I'd love to talk to people who've really, in very surprising ways, transcended what we would assume their limits would be. Like, does anyone pop to mind? And she literally said the words, and it was this tight. She said, well, my dance instructor is blind. And I thought, ding, 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 ding. Like, you don't expect a blind dance instructor. And I immediately said, Nancy, I want to meet that blind dance instructor, and I want to watch her class. Now, we're not talking about the Bolshoi here. When I went to see the class, we're not talking about people busting extraordinary moves. But we were talking about like the very best definition of a safe space, right? These were people who, when they're out in the world, they feel very vulnerable and they feel very self-conscious, and they move with enormous trepidation and enormous care, because the world is in some ways a dangerous place when you're moving through it without vision. And in this space at Visions at the social service agency, they could be physically free and physically uninhibited and move without fear, which most of us take for granted. And there was a joy in what they were experiencing that so moved me, and I thought was so instructive. So thank you for asking about Marion Shepard and her dance class.
I love that scene, and I wanted to be there, which was sort of, what I was saying. I felt that way often with this book. And then there was this, a judge, David Tatel. Am I saying his name right? He's a judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals in DC. And he found out he was going blind in his teens. But he said to you that he concentrates on his luck. I thought he was very interesting. I mean, we don't have to pause on each one, but then the other.
No, I'd love to say a few words about him.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Great.
Because he said to me, like, one of my favorite lines in the book, but I need to kind of back up a little. He, as you said, found out in his teens that he was likely going to go blind in his early 30s, and that's basically the classic manifestation in case of someone with retinitis pigmentosa. And there's somebody else in the book, a Mexican diplomat, who also has retinitis pigmentosa. And the classic progression of that is you find out, it's almost always, if not always, men who have it, and they find out in their teens. They start to have vision problems, and they're told probably by somewhere between your late 20s and early 40s, you'll be legally blind. And that's what happened to David Tatel. He nonetheless rose to the zenith of the legal profession. his court in DC, the U.S. District Court, Circuit District Court. I get the nomenclature wrong, but it's basically the main feeder court to the Supreme Court. It's one kind of like almost micro tier below the Supreme Court. And when I met him, he was in his early 70s, and he had been a distinguished jurist for 4 decades, all of that time blind. Many of the lawyers who'd appeared before him over the years had no idea he was blind. I had a mutual friend who introduced me to him, and he was willing to chat with me. And I got to know him, Heather, and I got to be very good friends with him and his wife, Edie. And one time when I was visiting him in DC, we were going to leave his chambers, and it was dinner time. We were going to go the 5 miles back to his and Edie's home in a different part of Washington, DC for dinner. She was making dinner. And I said to him, okay, so should I call the Uber or the Lyft or whatever? And he said, what are you talking about? We'll take the Metro. And I thought, well, how's that going to work? Because the Metro is like a good 8 blocks from his chambers. And I said, well, how are we getting to the Metro? Should I call an Uber to bring us to the Metro? And he goes, no, we're going to walk. And I thought, okay, he means we're going to walk because I'm here, and he's going to grab my arm, and I'm essentially going to lead him. No. He had learned, and this is what I mean about human adaptation and human resilience. He had learned over the years exactly how many steps it was from his chambers to the elevator. He could use what's called echolocation, like sounds, to the sounds of the way the information he got from sound, coupled with his memory, could guide him through a familiar physical space with incredible accuracy. We go out onto the street. Again, I'm expecting him to take my arm. He doesn't take my arm. He knows the terrain so well. He is so attuned to the visual, to the auditory cues of traffic, et cetera, that we essentially walked together with me merely acting as a fail-safe if necessary, all the way to the Metro, all the way into the Metro, all the way to the platform, onto the train. And I marveled, but when we were sitting down, I said, wow, I said, that's like, forgive me if this sounds patronizing or whatever, but I knew him well at that point. And I think he knew my heart was good. And I said, I can't believe like how fluidly and how ably and how without incident you could do all of that without vision. And he said to me, Frank, starfish can regrow limbs, but that's nothing compared to what people can do. And he had just shown me that. And the other stories in my book all essentially have that same moral. And that's the moral of what I've experienced in my tiny, small way, whether it's learning to listen to audiobooks, which I could never do before without becoming distracted. And now I listen to them at 1.7 speed. We are all so much more adaptable, nimble, and resilient than we know, because circumstances often don't demand it of us, but it is extraordinarily reassuring to realize, to recognize through this kind of hardship or challenge that you will be able to rise in ways you never expected, and you will be able to manage in ways you never expected when challenges come down the road.
Do you think that part of your resilience around your health problems is related to noticing? I mean, because noticing how you leaned in. I also say leaned in constantly, by the way.
I know do we all owe royalties to Sheryl Sandberg?
Yeah, I think we do. So, and yes, of course, spend more money on Facebook.
Yeah, I don't think Sheryl needs our money. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't think so either. But it's, it's unavoidable, because it's sort of like, okay, so, but my question is, do you feel that part of what got you through it was feeling a little bit proud of yourself, that you actually, weren't falling apart in the face of this huge challenge?
Yeah, that's a incredibly great and smart question. All your questions have been great. And by the way, I just want to pause and say to people, it's so much fun to be here with you, because as Heather said at the beginning, we haven't known each other that long. We moved to Chapel at the same time. It was total kismet, and we're having a good time with this like new Chapel Hill rooted friendship. And so thank you, Heather, for being here tonight. And I want to also echo, now I'm kind of spazzing all over the place, but I love Heather's book so much. It is so funny and it is so honest. And so I'm just delighted to be here. But that, the latest of your many good questions.
Thank you, Frank.
No, it's from the heart. Yeah, I mean, I actually, one of the things I noticed in the people I interviewed who had done the best, not just in surviving, but in kind of thriving despite, difficult circumstances, is in a very, very emotionally smart way. They allowed themselves a full measure of pride about their own perseverance. And why not? They deserved it. And I mean, to go back to those injections I was giving myself, that went on for 6 months. The first time I had to prepare the various syringes and transfer the fluid from here to there and sterilize my thigh and stick a needle in. I mean, the first time I did it, they send you home with a video. I watched the video 3 times. It probably took me an hour, right? Within a couple of months, I could do all of this in like 45 seconds. And I would walk into my kitchen, I would see the Sharps container, I would open my fridge, I would see all the vials, keeping company with the Chardonnay and other wine. And I would really feel like it gave me pleasure. Pleasure is maybe not the right word, but it made me feel good because this was a thing I was doing and I was doing it better than I thought I was, and I was doing it well. And the first time I kind of felt that way, I felt almost a little bit kind of petty about it. But then as I interviewed more of the people we've talked about whose portraits are in the book, I realized all of them were proud of the adaptations they'd made, of the sort of adjustments they'd made. And I say this in the book, but it made me think that we should have like a corollary to the famous aphorism. And in addition to when God gives you lemons, make lemonade, we should have the saying, when God gives you lemons, take a bow, because that's what I essentially did. And I think that wasn't an arrogant thing to do. I think it was a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great. I mean, I feel like it's such an unexpected state to land in where you feel like, I guess one question is, did you think that something like this would crush you before it happened? Did you sort of live in fear of something really bad happening with your health and you not being able to deal with it? Did you think of yourself as a different kind of person with different sort of weaknesses before this challenge?
Totally. I didn't live in fear of something bad happening per se, but I would look at people who were navigating challenges. I want to say like this, but every challenge is different, but who were navigating really difficult medical challenges. And I would think it's a really good thing that's not me, because if I got a piece of really bad or scary news, or if I was told I had to do something like having injections into my eye, I would curl into the fetal position, take to bed, and basically agree to see only those people who came to my bedside with gin and a martini shaker, and I would be melodramatic and I would be simpering and whatever. And I honestly would have believed that. But then this happened and I realized there was no percentage in that. And I realized that if I retreated from the world and if I kind of descended into a hole where I felt sorry for myself, the deeper I went into that hole and the longer I stayed in that hole, the harder it would be to get out. And you can't live your life in that hole and you don't want to be in that hole. But I am not someone who is destined to have that realization. I was not a particularly strong person. And I wrote this book not because I'm the least bit extraordinary, but I wrote this book because I'm ordinary. And people need to know that you have, if I had the ability to handle this sort of fright as well as I think I did, you do too. And you need to know that, and you need to sit with that, and you need to be armed with that as you age. And as the likelihood of something difficult in a medical and physical sense happening, as the likelihood of that increases. You want to be armed with the knowledge that you are going to be able to get through it.
That's right. You talk a lot about the ways that people solve these puzzles and how they kind of climb over these obstacles. But so much of it is really about, in some ways, these tools kind of come to you under duress, where it's not so much that you're constantly studying how other people do it. There are ways that everything you've used to get to, age 55, 56, everything you've used to make it to where you are comes back, and you can draw on it in this situation that asks you to dig a little deeper. It's interesting that it was interesting to me.
Can I ask you a question, Heather? It's like you're a couple or more than a couple of years younger than I am. But so whether it was the cancer,
I'm much, much, much younger than you, Frank.
Well, you look much, much younger, but I think your skincare regimen is just that much better, and your genes.
Pretty great, yeah.
But no, I mean, haven't you, whether it's recent or not so recent, I mean, haven't you really surprised yourself at key junctures with the way you've handled those junctures? These versus how, if someone had somewhat prophesied for you years in advance, how you would have assumed?
Yeah, I mean, I was afraid of cancer my mom had breast cancer and I had breast cancer, and I was afraid of it for decades. And I really did think that I would, in some ways you downplay to yourself, I could handle this and it would be nothing. But if that happened, I'd be crushed. You have in your mind some kind of separation. And I actually thought that if I had what I had and had to do, I thought that would be minor. And that when people even called that cancer, I sort of thought, whatever, that's not really, you just took care of it and you don't even have to do chemo. And you're not really facing the end of your life. You're just going through, like, it's just a few procedures. So in some ways I was surprised that actually facing this thing, I understand now that the word cancer will make you melodramatic about the end of your life, no matter what. And also waiting for the diagnosis. There are these miniature horrors within the larger horror, like having a needle stuck into your breast and then having to sit in an MRI machine that cannot reboot for 2 hours, which happened to me, where it was like the computer wasn't working and no one said to me, hey, I could hear the sounds. You've had an MRI before, right?
Yes, and I can't imagine being in there. I find half an hour unbearable. 2 hours sounds to me like torture.
I had them preventatively, so I was used to them, but the sound stopped, which was even worse because I had this needle in my breast and the sound stopped, and I thought, this thing isn't working anymore. And sure enough, I'm lying there for another, 20 minutes with no one talking to me. And finally, and part of it is just the helplessness that you feel in this situation where you're powerless and you're in a tiny space and you don't want to be a good patient. I actually learned after a while, I need to stop trying to be an A+ patient and just ask for what I need. I think that's something that people in health situations often have to confront. So once I did that, things got better. I actually became more resilient as I was willing to say, hey, thank you so much for helping me, but I need this thing. Or, I feel queasy. When you wake up from surgery saying, I feel very queasy, it's important. You have to be able to communicate with people.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's so important. And it's in the book. It's not a long part of the book, but what you just said is such an important message for people to realize. You have to take charge and be assertive as a patient. Your medical care will only be as good as you insist on it being. Your doctors will only be as good as the questions you ask them, as the bar you raise for them. Doctors are great people and they are sources of enormous wisdom and they are experts, but they're dealing with a chaos of things in a given day, and they're dealing with many, many patients. And if you don't go into your medical situations, be it breast cancer, be it NAION, if you don't go into those situations with smart questions, with the willingness and the presence of mind to give a full report about what you're going through and what you need, you're not going to get the care that you deserve and the care that is going to enable you to live as full a life as possible. And I think too many of us are trying to be, as you really nicely said, A+ patients. Too many of us are in a deferential posture. And I think a relationship with a doctor is more a partnership than it is a relationship of expert subject, you know?
Yeah. And also finding doctors who you feel comfortable with, who you can talk to, like holding out for doctors who you can connect to, I think is a big deal. If you can manage that, it's nice to, I feel like that changed a lot of, I went to Cedars-Sinai, I was in LA, and the doctors there were incredible. I mean, you know, I say this from a place of privilege, obviously, to be able to go there, but you know, the quality of, it's mostly just a personality thing to find someone who you connect with and who you can trust and you feel comfortable asking questions is kind of a big deal. So I want to get to one more question before we go to a few of the reader viewer questions, audience questions. And that is, I kind of wondered if your attunement changed, if your sensitivity to other people's experience of the world changed, because one of my favorite passages in your book is about driving your father around. And I love how you admit that you don't know what to do with him and you're not sure, you know, the way that you sort of describe the imperfect nature of your relationship, even though it seems that you two got along well, were close and knew how to communicate, that there was a way that you knew that you needed to really treasure this time with your father. And you wrote that you were just you drove, I think, to an old house where he used to live with your mom. And you wrote, being with him, looking at him, I saw that over the 2 decades since mom's death, his weakened mind had nonetheless done him an extraordinary kindness, taking a good marriage with a normal allotment of highs and lows and turning it into the grandest of romances, a fairy tale whose chapters and big scenes he could replay at will as an answer and a ballast to his grief. I saw that he was, at this late stage of the game, comfortable enough with me and comfortable enough with himself to do that. And I saw that what he felt when he did it wasn't sorrow, it was gratitude. I feel like it takes such, I mean, it's so beautifully written, first of all. But you say that this moment with him went into the storehouse of keepsakes and that you treasured it. I thought it was amazing that you could notice what he was doing in that moment, that you took it in, and then you were able to write about it so beautifully. And also that you, in the moment, could feel how much it mattered to you, which is a challenge, particularly for people who, like us, who write and observe and think too much and are distracted all the time and sometimes don't remember to slow down and tune in. And I wondered if that was something that you've always done or if it was something that you were attuned to at this particular time.
No, it wasn't something I'd always done. It's something I do now, and I'm really grateful for that. I think what happened, the best way to explain it is, I did not dwell, heeding Dory's lesson, I did not dwell on what might happen to me or what had happened to me. I did acknowledge and recognize it. And I thought to myself, well, what happens if I do lose my sight? You know, there will be things unavailable to me. And Heather, that somehow made me think, well, I want to imprint as deeply on my brain the things that are available to me now so that I can access them as memories in the future. And well, I first kind of thought that in terms of visual material. I realized that that's true of everything. You know, we kind of say derisively that someone is living in the past or that someone is kind of lost in memory or kind of just has gone off to some place with their own memories. But why aren't memories like jewels in a treasure chest, right? I now view my living and the things that give me joy or have meaning in the present, I view them not only as things to really pay attention to in the present, but that by paying attention to them, you actually tuck them away so they'll be with you forevermore. And in the same way my father had tucked away these things that he was experiencing then, I thought, I want to tuck away this moment with my father, this intimacy, this connection. I want to tuck that away so that later on, for instance, in this conversation, I can access that and feel the same degree of emotion, or at least not that watered down an amount of emotion about it as I did in the present. I kind of feel that way, like throughout life, and I think we're alike in this regard. I've done an enormous amount of travel. I've been extremely blessed. I've seen not just dozens, but probably scores of countries. And I never really kind of paused and thought, why am I doing that? And is that a good thing? But now I think, you know what? I was, in fact, taking advantage of my potency of the moment to amass a body of knowledge, a body of experiences, a storehouse of memories that will be there with me in the long run if I need them. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because what you're describing is feeling something in the moment and then feeling it again and again after. So you not only heighten your sensation of these important moments and these sort of like feelings of joy, and also I would argue, sadness can be something you treasure too, if it's poignant, if it matters. But you not only tune in more and heighten and sort of turn up the saturation on these experiences, but you also create a strong enough memory that when you revisit it, you can feel those sensations again. And really we're talking about attuning yourself in a way that you can feel more all the time, not constantly. Obviously, we all have distractions and times that we're stuck in our heads, but I loved that this book was so much about just really sucking the marrow from the bones of life and just tasting things and celebrating just the presence of the people you love and the feeling of understanding them. I mean, what I love so much about that scene partially is not just the feeling, though, it's an appreciation of where your father is emotionally in his life, understanding what he's doing, because you had a glimpse at how it might be to be towards the end of your life, and you were appreciating how he was managing it. It felt like such a piece with the book, but it was also just this beautiful. I just love that scene so much. It was one of my favorite things from any memoir.
thank you.
So let's turn to a few questions, if you don't mind. We have a few more minutes, and I have a few questions here. Okay, so the first one is, what bargaining did you do with yourself about eyesight versus hearing or speaking? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it does. Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, I didn't do any bargaining, and I still don't do any bargaining like, let me hold on to my left eye and I will be a better person. I want to be a better person because I think it leads to a better life and more contentment, not because I think that will buy me some karmic dispensation to hold on. But also in that question is a very interesting thing that a lot of people ask about. And I think it's a presumption that you would think, oh my, like, why is it my eyesight? It would be easier to be without hearing. Why is it my hearing? It would be easier to be without taste or whatever like that. This notion that certain senses are easier or harder to lose or be without. And it's funny because I do think the fear of blindness is maybe the king of those fears, so to speak. And I write about this in the book, like there are all of these horror movies where, or not horror movies, but there are all of these movies, Wait Until Dark, Jennifer 8, where like the greatest manifestation of vulnerability is the blind character. much more so than the deaf character. But there was actually, when I was doing research for the book, there was actually this fascinating Dear Abby thread where various people were writing in, and there was this debate going on about whether it was worse to be blind or deaf. The silliest of debates, right? And Helen Keller had apparently, and I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, I do unravel it in the book, and I just unfortunately don't remember that page of the book well enough right now, but had weighed in and said it's actually better to be blind than to be deaf, because if you're deaf, you're cut off from the most important thing, which is the communication and company of the people around you. Well, I think you could pick that apart and say that's not true, but it is just interesting, this sort of hierarchy of the senses, this sort of competition. I remember thinking at one point, I so love dramatic topography. I have over my life made it a point to see many of the world's great coastlines. I'm a visual person. That's horrible. But then I paused and I thought, but wait a second, like, you know, I love music. If I never heard the Church's song Under the Milky Way again, I would be inconsolable. Like, I don't think you can do that sort of competition. We want it all. When things are going well, we have it all. But when we lose something, luckily we have other things, other stimuli, other diversions to come into the fray.
Yeah, that's right. Wow, good answer. I could not have answered that. That was that was really good.
Well, I've thought about the question's a smart one, because you do think about these things. You think about, am I losing the most valuable sense? I don't think there is a most valuable sense. There's just senses.
Well, it's interesting because when you said, I love beautiful coastlines, I love beautiful things, but I also love beautiful music, it actually is, I mean, and I feel like this process is sort of reflected in your book. There's a way that it's sort of like, it's a good feeling to think about how much you love your senses at all. So even asking the question, which senses are the most important, is sort of a delicious thing. Elaine, yeah. I see you there. Is this a TikTok? Is it time to stop?
You don't have to. I wish you could go on for years. This is so amazing. It's so good that we can't just let it be seen once and go away. I've been getting texts throughout the evening saying, will you archive this? I want to see it again. And I got one from Mark that said, yes, he will. So tomorrow, if it's okay with you, Frank and Heather, we will have the archive ready, and the people who have links because they bought tickets from Books Inc. or Rakestraw or Dominican or Book Passage will be able to see it again. I know I want to see it again. It was an amazing hour from two incredible people. I just feel so lucky that we were able to be part of this. And I know that Rakestraw and Books Inc. will be reaching out to their customers, and Dominican and Book Passage will be sending our customers an email tomorrow reminding you that you can see the archive, and also letting you know about upcoming Institute for Leadership Studies events. We have 4 more for just the spring. And I just want everyone to have these 2 treasures. I know that almost everybody who is online with us tonight, because we're so pushy, we like to sell books, got a free book with your ticket. A wise businessman told me a long time ago to stop saying that you get a ticket and a book. He said, the book's free, you paid for the ticket. It just happens to be included in the ticket. And please call me at Book Passage, email me, you want Foreverland. And once you get it, you're going to be hooked. So you are both absolutely treasures. And I'm ready to come knock on your door in Chapel Hill. This is fantastic. You have a new groupie. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Elaine.
Yeah, thank you to Book Passages. This was great.
all these booksellers are going to be selling your books. I know that a lot of booksellers watch tonight, and they are going to be putting them in the hands of everyone who says, I need something great to read. We have two great
We
books.
appreciate that, right, Heather?
Yes, sure. Yeah, put them in the hands, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Dominican and Rakestraw and Booksync. Good night.